everyone, Jeff Lee here at AbelCine, joined today by Tom Cubby, Senior Sales Support Engineer at Sony, with very new, exciting developments. So this is the brand new PXW-FX9. So I think the first thing I have to ask you, what's in the name, right? Because you've historically always had, FS bodies and whatnot. So can you get a little bit into sort of the thought process behind the FX nomenclature?
Well, it's sort of a trick question, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
So if you go back one model, we'll say to our FS7 series, we are jumping up from a Super 35 sensor to a full frame. So hence the FX instead of FS to make that differentiation. And of course, we didn't want to have too much confusion with an FX7, so it just makes sense to make it FX9.
Right, fair point. Now I know a big point about this camera that's really important to keep in mind is this is sort of a culmination of several years of research and work by Sony when we're talking about what you've learned with Alpha series as well as the FS, 5 FS7, as well as the Venice. It actually even has kind of the Venice gray color scheme, which I appreciate. So can you get a little bit into that, sort of the mentality of sort of the three ecosystems kind of converging into this one?
Sure, sure. So with the success of the FS7, there's still always those requests out in the field. And part of what I do at Sony is be voice of the customer. So we bring that information back to headquarters and it makes its way back to Japan. And then, of course, there's new technologies constantly being developed. And what we decided to do with this particular camera, the FX9, is take what really worked well with the FS7, add the new technologies, merge technologies from different lines like the Alpha 7 series, like the Venice camera, and then combine all three of those to make one really amazing camera.
Right. So it's not obviously replacing or a substitute for any of those cameras, but rather a new tool within the ecosystem for different types of filmmakers.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, good. I must have read the company line properly then.
Yeah.
You, of course, mentioned the full frame sensor. So that's an important part of this camera as well. So it's, from my understanding, not the Venice sensor. It's a different sensor.
Not the Venice sensor at all. It's a newly designed full frame 6K Exmor R with built-in fast hybrid autofocus. So it's a mouthful, but it warrants all of that information.
And I know cinematographers, filmmakers, we don't love auto anything, but Sony approached this in kind of a really interesting way where you still have autofocus to allow the cinematographer to choose, though, however, how that engages based on the subject and what they're shooting. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. Well, as any cinematographer would want to have that manual control, know this, that's always going to be there.
Right, that's important.
Right? That's important. So, but with the fast hybrid autofocus system and the parameters that you can control, it really makes it a very effective feature to have. Things like being able to lock onto a subject so that even if something else moves in front of that subject, the camera will maintain focus on that subject. Or on the opposite end of that, to move quickly off of that subject to something else. So it could be a documentary on racing where a race car leaves the screen and the next car is right there. And you need to be able to grab that focus quickly. You'll be able to do things like that. On the other side of it, it's like, how fast do I really want this focus to move? Right? A slow, cinematic, maybe rack focus style.
Okay, to mimic like an AC.
Yeah, versus something that happens very quickly. So there's the in-betweens as well. So it's not just one or the other. There's a transition in different speeds for those parameters.
Right, that definitely impressed me the most when I saw that. You had a lot of variables for those two different settings. So on the topic of the sensor, of course, we can't not talk about the ISO or the fact that this is a dual base ISO. So can you describe the ISO bases on this camera and how they compare maybe, say, to the Venice or what that looks like?
Well, slightly different than the Venice. Again, it's a completely different sensor. So as much as, it's got the color of the Venice and everything else, the Venice is, stands alone at the top of the food chain. But that being said, the dual ISO mode on this camera is 800 on the low end and 4000 on the high end. So you're going to be typically shooting in that 800 mode for most of your scenes where you have control of your lighting or you're outdoors, but there are going to be those times where you have challenging lighting, and that 4000 is going to come in handy.
Yeah, I imagine documentary filmmakers, wildlife folks are going to love that feature, to be able to really see into the darkness.
Absolutely.
That's great. And of course, on the other side of the sensor discussion is always the topic of image stabilization. And we know there's some lenses that support optical image stabilization, but you're doing it a little bit differently with the sort of behind the lens approach. So
yeah. So let me first talk about right now the way it's going to work. It's only going to work with the Sony E-mount lens family. But the way it's going to work is we're taking gyro information, recording that in the metadata, and then allowing you to make the adjustments in post for image stabilization. So the benefits are I can choose which shots and when. You know, what happens if you leave your image stabilizer on and you're on a tripod and you get those weird artifacts, right?
Yeah.
No longer have to worry about that. Or maybe you want just a subtle amount of image stabilization versus something, you know, really strong, like correcting that shot where that camera person stumbled on a rock or something like that, right? So you have that flexibility in post, but because the information's in the metadata, the process is very fast. So we're currently using Catalyst Browse for that process. So it's going to look at that metadata and it's going to quickly process that level of stabilization that you choose. And it's going to do it much, much faster than your typical software enhanced stabilization.
Right, that's a good point, because instead of looking at the image and trying to sort of decipher what the scene looks like, you're just going to use the actual metadata coming off of the accelerometer or the gyro.
Exactly.
And that's really neat about the fact that you can choose your own, because there are often times when you're doing certain scenes, you might want to add a little bit of shake or pull, you know, if it's too smooth, maybe you want to, you know, kind of have that option in the post-process.
But yeah, you can actually get that gimbal look.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's obviously, you mentioned Catalyst Browse, and I'm assuming that'll come to third-party support as well at some point?
Yeah, we are in discussion with third parties as well. And for those who don't know, Catalyst Browse is a free downloadable software that is available through Sony.
Okay, great. I assume also then would work with Catalyst Prepare in addition to Browse.
Yeah, the Prepare and the Edit are add-ons to Catalyst Browse.
Okay, all right, so obviously it would naturally come with that. Great. Of course, as I'm looking at the camera, we see the ND switch, and there's a variable ND wheel, which makes me think that, of course, there is a variable ND similar to, say, the FS5. Right, so that's a big,
and the FS7M2, correct.
Right, so that's been a big popular feature. So same capabilities there as well?
Yeah, different layout. I think it's ergonomically more friendly because I don't have to reach around to turn a dial. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But a simple button push over here engages your ND filter. Flip the switch over, just like on our previous model cameras, and adjust the variable ND with the dial. But what's new is we've added the ND auto button just below, so now you don't have to tie up an assignable button when you're using your auto ND.
And that's one of the coolest features, is to be able to actually change not depth of field, like you could change depth of field racks, rather, I should say. So as you're doing a shot, if you want to increase or decrease depth of field without changing exposure, you can grab your iris ring, do that manually, but then have the camera control ND on the back end.
It's quite amazing. Yeah,
that's pretty neat. And actually, you have a couple of new buttons here too. I noticed there's a new wheel, which looks like they're tied to the sort of normal exposure things that a filmmaker or the camera op will need on a day-to-day basis. So, like white balance and shutter. Yeah.
Sure. So. As I said before, a lot of the feedback that I get from the field we pass on up, and one of the big requests was, I want to be able to change my white balance without having to go into the menu, meaning dial it in. So I can push the white balance button, and while that's pushed, adjust this dial here and dial in my white balance in 100-degree Kelvin increments.
Oh, great. And of course, you still have the hard switches for the presets.
Yeah.
When you need the fast and dirty kind of.
And there's actually another way to adjust those parameters using the direct menu access, which, again, we brought over from the FS5 series. So on the hand grip on the FS5, which ironically is the same grip, a lot of folks like that slightly smaller grip with the strap around it. So we incorporate that into the smart grip of the FX9. So the combination of the comfort of the grip plus the button functionality gives us that direct menu access. So if it's on your shoulder, it might be easier to access parameters for white balance and shutter speed and gain, ISO, through the smart grip handle. Or if you're on a tripod, it may be easier to use these
Sure.
buttons and dials here.
Right, great. So Tom, of course, you've already talked a little bit about some of the features that this has from the Alpha family as well as the FS family, but we definitely need to touch upon some of the features that it's brought over from the Venice family, including the color and the look. I think that's really important to Sony and sort of one of the design principles of this camera. So can you get into the sort of the look and the importance there?
Sure. So the new look, the new color, it's called S Cinetone, and it will be the default setting in your paint menu for color. So right out of the box, you can obtain that real pleasing natural skin tone,
Right.
nice highlight roll off that people love based on the expertise from what we created with Venice. So it's not, again, like you said, it's not the Venice sensor, it's not the exact color science of the Venice, but using that same expertise, we developed this color, and we really like it a lot, and I think our customers will too.
Right, and that's of course ultimately one of the most important things, if not the most important thing about any camera, is how it looks.
Exactly, and right out of the box, you can just pull the camera out and have that look. So if you're not an expert color grader,
Right.
you don't have to, you can be rest assured you're not gonna have to go through years of trial and error and
Sure.
experience to get to that level, to get a look that's going to be very pleasing.
Right. So switching gears for a little bit, if you don't mind, obviously we have to talk about the record capabilities and the codecs. It's pretty obvious that it uses XQD cards because it says so right on the side of the camera there.
Correct.
But what type of codec support are we looking at?
So we didn't change much from the FS7 series, so we're still going with your XAVC-I, XAVC-L, and MPEG 42250.
Okay.
So those are all in-camera codecs.
Right, with the dual XQD slots.
Dual XQD slots, so you'll have the same capabilities there, plus the utility card slot, which is an SD card slot, now allows you to record proxy files as well.
Onto the SD card itself.
Onto the SD card itself.
Okay, so simultaneous then, of course, you'll have your, say, XAVC-I, and as well as the MPEG-2 on the SD card.
Correct.
Great. And of course, there's also going to be an extension back, much like the FS7 series, called the XTCA-FX9, I suppose.
Wow, you did your homework.
Yeah, but that'll have raw capabilities similar to the previous extension back.
16-bit linear RAW.
Okay.
It'll also have timecode and genlock built in. However, surprise, you're not going to need that on the camera itself. There is actually a timecode I/O.
Yeah, we saw that. So that's really nice. I'm just going to flip the camera around here because that's great. You actually have dedicated timecode port with a hard switch for in-out as well
Correct.
as genlock, which is fantastic to have. But you still have that capability if you need with the extension back, if you need that sort of extra functionality.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. I was pretty excited about that one because that was a huge request.
Sure.
And again, our customers are very important to us and what their needs are, and so having things like that put on the camera, it makes me feel good about
Right.
my interaction with our customers.
For sure. And on the extension back, of course, you have, like you mentioned, you have another timecode port, but also the ability to put a V-Lock battery on there.
So we didn't stray away in that respect. So again, the things that work, why change the battery system if it worked, right? So we have the V-Lock battery. If you look up here, there's actually 2 USBs. That's for our wireless interface. So you can either put Wi-Fi or 5G dongles on those.
Like cellular dongles?
Yeah,
okay.
cellular dongles so that you can stream video. And then once this is connected, obviously, to the camera, you can also stream those, or I should say, transfer those proxy files that you've recorded to an FTP server.
Okay, so obviously you could stream, like you mentioned, those MPEG files to an FTP server, or using RTMP, you can stream to some sort of video server or playback.
Correct.
Right, so for live broadcast.
Correct, and Sony has hardware as well as software solutions in that regard as well. We have our XDCam Air, our C Cloud services, and we have a hardware device, which is certainly a mouthful, but I believe it's our RX110, PWX RX110, which can take in up to 30 streams from one unit and send out 2 selected SDI outputs.
So of course, we already established that the camera has a included genlock and timecode in-out, but also a dedicated timecode out on the extension back as well.
Correct.
And other things on this include what looks like there's some power outputs. right?
Yep, you have your D-tap as well as your Hiroshi connector. So depending on your accessories, you have a couple of options there. There are a couple of USB interfaces on top that will accept either a Wi-Fi dongle or your typical cellular dongles to do live streaming or file transfer.
Great.
And if you prefer a more reliable way of doing that, there's a RJ45 right about here. So
cable into
hardwire connection for those purposes.
Right. And what I love about this is that a lot of the functionality is no longer requires the extension pack. This is sort of the strictly optional for those that need it. But the camera itself has a really strong, robust feature set that not everyone's going to need all these features that this brings.
True, but if you do want the highest level of recording, you know, having that 16-bit linear RAW that you'll get again with the firmware upgrade, that's going to give you, you know, make the most out of that brand new sensor, that you know, that dual ISO, that 6K resolution, and the fast hybrid autofocus. You want to take advantage of what that camera is going to give you and record it at the highest level. You definitely want to have an XDCA-FX9.
Right, great, that's fantastic. And then of course a slot, what looks like for audio, drop-in receiver.
And that'll accept audio from both of our systems, so our DWX as well as our UWP series, and you can get 2 channels from there. So speaking of audio, since we're right here, it's a nice transition to go. The original, I should say, the previous model, our FS7 series, had 4 channels of audio, but you could only adjust 2 from the exterior element of the camera. So you'd have to go into the menu, and you know, when you're out there in the field like that, that was a big request. So we have the 4 pots here, so you can adjust those, and then there's switches to route where you want to get your audio from. So I can get audio from the 2 XLRs, from the hot shoe,
the MI shoe interface.
And then also from the XDCA. So I have 6 different places that I can choose the audio, which is I love, because now I can actually get 4 channels of wireless audio if I choose to do so.
Right, and that's impressive and obviously very functional. And even things like the volume button, I noticed, been mounted in a very user-friendly location on the camera body where you can just glance over and dial those in. Yeah, so it looks like you mentioned earlier in the very beginning of this conversation, that this is a lot of sort of the work of the various brands and families, as it were, combined into this sort of this one new platform that you're developing. As far as, just to continue the conversation on codecs, as far as like resolutions and frame rates, what type of options are we looking at within those codecs?
Sure. Well, it is a full frame sensor, so obviously people are going to want to do some things in that regard. But we'll also have a Super 35 crop mode as well. So there'll be, in the Super 35 mode, you'll have up to 60p in HD, as well as UHD, with DCI coming later firmware upgrade. And then in the full frame mode, you've got HD as well, up to 60p, with 30p being the current max, or the initial max for UHD, and then firmware coming for DCI and for the 60p on the UHD side.
Okay, fantastic.
So when the camera ships, you'll be able to get up to 120 frames per second in HD in either Super 35 or full frame mode. And then in UHD, we're doing something a little special. So that XDCA that we just took a look at, with, again, firmware-based upgrades, there'll be the ability to get a 4K 120 frame output. So that's going to be real nice. And then in the full frame mode as well, you're able to get your 120 frame with 180 coming at a later firmware upgrade.
And the other thing too to sort of bring up is the sort of construction and build of the camera. So it does utilize a fully, I believe, magnesium frame.
That is magnesium.
Right. So this is actually the frame out of what the FX7 is. This is not some sort of prototype or any.
No, this is the FX9 frame.
Right. And of course there are some plastic components just to cover the buttons and the skin of it, but the sort of the main structure is very sound, using this magnesium frame, which I think is pretty cool. Oops, upside down. I think it's kind of cool to see it and sort of see how the camera is built, kind of the skin of it, versus what we see.
Absolutely. Well, the magnesium was what made the FS5 series and FS7 series so durable. So again, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right.
This shows you can make a camera lighter,
right,
without making it cheaply.
Right. So we looked at some of the input-output capabilities of the XDCA-FX9, but of course, as we discussed, the camera has a lot of input-outputs built in. Of course, timecode we already discussed, but you still have your classic SDI and HDMI combinations.
Correct. Well. Yeah, SDI 1 and 2, as well as your HDMI output. The difference from our previous series, the FS7 series, is that SDI 1 will give you a 12G output.
Oh, great. So for those who need to output a 4K or high frame rate output, you have that as built in for those monitors that support it. You also brought a new lens, of course. So this is also the introduction to a new series of lenses. So this is a 16-35G lens. Can you describe a little bit about that? Because I understand that you are going to be rolling out potentially another lineup of lenses, following this model.
Correct. And Sony in recent years has become a very big player in the lens market. We've got a ton of lens technology that we're implementing. Our G Master series is really taken over the industry with its beautiful bokeh and really sharp glass. And so we kind of felt like our customers with this type of camera would want a lens that would have a little bit more cinematic control. Mm-hmm. So we're developing a high quality piece of glass that still has that E-mount interface that can still utilize autofocus and auto iris, yet still have that manual control. So similar to the kit lens where you have that ring where you can be fully manual, or that option to go hybrid, so to speak. It's certainly available. There's a motor on the lens itself. This particular one is a 16-35 T3.1.
Okay.
So as you can see, we've moved away from f-stops for this line and using the t-stops having more accuracy.
Cinema, right. And you mentioned there's a motor, of course, on it. So you do have the option to go a powered zoom.
Correct.
Right.
And that motor can be removed for certain applications if need be.
So I'm sure the question a lot of folks are going to want to know is availability and whether there's going to be other options for purchase, between just body only or otherwise.
Well, actually, in true Sony fashion, there'll be two packages available. It'll be the body only and the, of course, K package, which includes the kit lens, which is the SELP 28-135. Okay. Those will be available in January of 2020. And the new lens that we spoke about, that'll be in the spring.
Okay, great. So right around the corner, basically.
Yeah, right around the corner.
That's great.
I'm
so again,
excited.
Tom, thank you so much. We're looking forward to this camera. We think it'll do really well with our client base, and I think congratulations on another fantastic product.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be here as well.
Absolutely. So that's it for now at our first look at the PXW-FX9. Thank you again for Tom Cubby and Sony for stopping by. We'll catch you next time.